We are getting closer and closer to the first regional championship in Sacramento, California that will feature the new Surging Spark set for the first time. We had some amazing moments at the major tournaments with Stellar Crown, culminating with an amazing finals match at LAIC. I feel like it definitely delivered a great combination of new archetypes, powerful upgrades, and interesting strategies to the format, so hopefully Surging Sparks can follow in its footsteps as well. And just like Stellar Crown, there will be tournaments around the world that will feature these new cards alongside all the current fan favorites in Raging Bolt, Regidrago, Terrapagos, and more. With this in mind, the question on everyone's mind is, how will the tiers shift? Which decks will come out on top during this run of tournaments? And today's video, I will talk about what I consider the best decks heading into the next round of tournaments and how Surging Sparks will affect the overall metagame. Don't forget that you can watch videos 24 hours earlier if you become a channel member by following the link in the description below. This kind of support helps me continue to create content like this, so please consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy the content. The C tier contains a nice variety of decks that are a combination of fun gimmicks, powerful combos, or just downright annoying decks that can shut down an opponent's deck, but I personally don't have a lot of hope for these decks in a competitive environment. Starting off, we have good old Ancient Box. Roaring Moon's Vengeance Fletching is a powerful attack that builds up as turns go by, and it can have good price trades with Rulebox Pokemon. However, getting to that point can be difficult, and the deck is inconsistent at times. The new Koraidon helps provide a much more reliable and powerful attacker early on, whilst you build up your discard pile of ancient cards, but with the drawback of needing to attack first with a Roaring Moon before you get the bonus damage from the unrelenting onslaught attack. This Koraidon alone though is not enough to put this deck beyond the C tier, and I don't expect it to be a competitive deck as long as Dragapult, Charizard, Regidrago and Lugia remain at the top. The heavy inclusion of Bravery Charm in Raging Bolt decks also made one of its best matchups a really tough one now. Next we have the new Milotic X, walling decks that can now directly counter Terra Pokemon with its Sparkling Scales ability. In theory, it has near auto wins against decks like Terrapagos, Charizard and Dragapult, and when combined with other powerful Pokemon of this same style such as Noivern, Cornerstone Ogerpon, Mimikyu and even Gastrodon, you can technically wall everything in the format. The real issue though is getting the right lock for your opponent's deck, and if they have alternate attackers to deal with your wall. Decks like Charizard could use Pidgeot or Radiant Charizard as attacking threats, as well as Dusknoir's Curse Blast against Milotic, but Raging Bolt decks can't really get around a Noivern. However, these sort of decks tend to have very polarizing matchups with either really good or really bad ones, and they fall apart if an opponent has two different strong attackers to bypass whatever wall you have in front of them. Next we have our Charlatan EX, which has a very cool ability that synergizes perfectly with its attack and high HP. A lot of the time you will use it to attach energy to yourself in order to continue attacking after healing with a Professor Turo scenario, and immediately having another Charlatan ready to go without weakness. Relican's Memory Dive ability plus Duraludon's Raging Hammer is another cool combo the deck has in order to dish out additional damage. However, Raging Bolt has no trouble at all taking down our Charlatan EX, and it is safe from a return KO from it thanks to its base 240 HP. Since Raging Bolt continues to be one of the best and most played decks in the format, our Charlatan doesn't have too much hope of being successful until Raging Bolt is kept in check. Next up we have Cloth, a gimmicky deck reliant on multiple pieces by poisoning yourself with Brute Bonnet, extra poison damage through Radiant Sneasler or Perilous Jungle, as well as binding Mochi to round out the poison archetype. After getting top 4 at a regional in the Stellar Crown format, it has continued to have okay results, but nothing spectacular, so I don't expect that to change with Surging Sparks since the deck didn't gain any new cards to work with. It's a fine deck that struggles against most of the top tier decks due to their high HP and this deck's vulnerability against disruption. And the final deck in the C tier is Ceruledge EX. This deck will have the novelty factor going for it, as well as it being a very simple yet powerful deck. Its first attack, Abyssal Flames, makes the deck focus on discarding as much energy as possible in order to increase the damage output and reach 14 to 16 energy in the discard pile in order to 1-KO all the big threats in the metagame. While you can likely do it by turn 3, that might be one turn too late, and thus despite the simplicity, I don't think the deck will be able to keep up with other faster and more aggressive decks at the top of the metagame, which will not only disrupt your game plan, but also start 1-KOing you before you have enough energy in the discard to 1-KO them back. And moving on to the B tier, these decks either were already good or got some significant upgrades and new options with which they can become more competitive in the current metagame. All of these can compete and make deep runs at tournaments and have the potential to win in the right hands. First, we have Roaring Moon EX, a deck that is very solid and aggressive, can take down anything your opponent sets up with Frenzied Gouging, and has both Professor Status Vitality and Dark Patch at its disposal, as well as a wide array of powerful backup attackers in Roaring Moon and Petron EX, and a new support option in Latias EX. Heck, it can even power up a Fezandipity EX out of the blue with Dark Patches for a quick snipe. This deck will always be viable, but despite gaining Latias EX support, it remains in the B tier, overshadowed by the more powerful ancient deck based on Raging Bolt when it comes down to big basics that take one-hit KOs. Next, we have Pikachu EX in Lost Box decks. Pikachu is a perfect inclusion in Lost Box as it already plays Mirage Gate to cover the awkward energy cost of Topaz Bolt, and their Resolute Heart ability means Pikachu is more resilient in the super aggressive metagame. 300 damage is a great number for Lost Box players to have access to, and Gravity Mountain can help boost that damage a little bit more in order to get the KO on the high HP stage 2 Pokemon in the format. However, Lost Box as an archetype is still in trouble due to the existence of Regidrago, Dragapult and Lugia, so despite gaining a powerful attacker, it's not enough to bring it back to the top of the metagame where it once lived. Next we have Miraidon, which is in the similar train of thought as Roaring Moon. It gained quite a few significant upgrades in Pikachu EX, Latias EX and Magneton, all of which help round out the deck into a more consistent archetype that isn't just riding the electric generator roller coaster each turn. However, it still comes up short when compared to other decks. Based on big basic Pokemon as other than Raichu, its damage output is even more limited than Roaring Moon's. Raikou and Re:Zero didn't help it succeed in the Stellar Crown metagame, and I doubt the new cards will give it the help it will need to become a top tier deck, as it is quite simply a worse Raging Bolt deck at this point in time. Snorlax has been quite successful in the Stellar Crown metagame, and I expect that to continue with Surging Sparks. Its blocking strategy of either preventing retreat or running your opponent out of resources and then setting up the perfect wall with Mimikyu or Cornerstone Ogerpon is extremely powerful, and none of the new cards get in the way of it. I dare say Latias EX being played in various decks and then potentially playing less switching effects might benefit it. But the problem remains in its close to auto loss to Lugia, as well as very difficult Regidrago and Terrapagos matchups. These 3 decks are at the very top of the metagame both in popularity and strength, so you need to get very lucky to either dodge them during a whole tournament run or when playing them to sneak out a win. However, when the spotlight isn't on Snorlax and it isn't respected enough, that's when Snorlax has the biggest potential to make for a good showing. Next up we have Pidgeot Control. This style of deck has a very dedicated group of players who really enjoy playing it and figuring out the exact cards to include to counter every potential meta deck. This is done through Pidgeot's Quick Search, which gives you all the control to find the specific piece you need at the right moment. So you can go for the biggest and most hurtful strategy to your opponent to delay them or cancel out whatever win condition they're trying to play for. However, since Stellar Crown the metagame has gotten even faster and more aggressive. Therefore, these sort of decks always need to slow things down to their level to be able to adapt and keep their opponents contained. Surging Sparks does bring 2 new interesting cards for the archetype though that will make it a bit more successful with counter gain to help use attacks like Poofalon's Lost Headbutt for a single double turbo or Rotom's Crushing Pulse to disrupt an opponent in a much more definitive way than Luxray V can. Pidgeot was not able to produce any significant results in the Stellar Crown metagame, but perhaps these new options can help it climb the ranks in the near future. And finally we have Goldengo, which did get a decent chunk of results during the Stellar Crown metagame, and it's looking to keep building on that with new inclusions such as Togekiss and the new Energy Surge Pro A-Spec. With it, it probably forgoes the possibility to use Palkia V-Star and Radiant Greninja as the energy are too diversified, but that immediate thin of 6 to 8 cards as well as the perfect setup to 1KO anything does make it a bit more threatening. Of course, the A-Spec could be priced, and that will really hurt the deck the 10% of the time it tends to happen, but overall, the deck will now be a bit more serious, and so it has finally moved out of its home in the C tier, at least for now. Energy Surge Pro really helps the deck, but overall it's still very frail and will likely be clunky when the A-Spec is priced. And now it's time to talk about the A tier. The decks in this tier are some of the most powerful and have more than proven themselves in the Stellar Crown metagame. Surging Sparks offers very little in terms of new cards or upgrades for most of these decks, but it also doesn't offer anything powerful enough to challenge them yet. Starting with Iron Thorns, this deck won the World Championships and has now achieved multiple top finishes, so anyone who doesn't take this deck seriously is in for a bad surprise. There are currently very few good abilities on Pokemon that don't have a rule box, so Iron Thorns tends to have an immediate advantage against most top tier decks. However, it is often let down by the heavy reliance of coin flips between Crushing Hammer and Pokemon Catcher, as well as having a low damage output. Despite these hindrances, it's a very threatening deck, and it can run away with games simply by preventing its opponents to do anything at all during a whole game. Iron Thorns really brings the game back to the basics. Both players are limited to attaching 1 energy per turn, play 1 supporter per turn, and draw very few extra cards, and since this deck is designed to play that way, it can slowly but surely take over any game. Next we have Vanity EX combined with Gardevoir EX. This deck focuses on denying item cards from their opponents while slowly retreating back and forth between Vanettes, building up a bit of damage through Gardevoir's ability and then sending that damage to your opponent through the use of Monkidori's Adrena Brain ability. The format has some decks where almost half of the cards in them are item cards, which is where this deck shines. Almost out of the blue, this deck started getting result after result during the later stages of the Stellar Crown metagame, so many of them that it finally got split from the other more standard Gardevoir decks focusing on Drifloon. The combination of item lock, Gravity Stone to increase retreat cost, as well as the damage manipulation of Monkidori and the threat of Mew EX, Gardevoir EX and Screamtail as an attacker makes the perfect storm for this deck to shine. And so we have the other Gardevoir deck as well, which is focused on the single price super powerful Pokemon Drifloon and Screamtail. The deck doesn't rely on 2 price liabilities such as Squawkability or Rotom, but rather on Cureless Refinement ability to get going, thin the deck, and get energy in the discard pile. The deck has been a mainstay in the format at the top for a long time, but all the damage spread and bench damaging attacks have made its life a bit harder than usual as of late. However, that hasn't stopped Gardevoir from getting good results in the Stellar Crown metagame, and I expect that to continue once Surging Sparks is legal since it can handle its own against any deck at the top as long as it gets set up. And next we have Palkia Dusknoir. This combination feels almost too good to be true sometimes, as Dusknoir can eliminate Manaphy from opponents' benches to pave the way for Radiant Greninja or Greninja EX to snipe away at an opponent's bench with no restriction, or it can help Palkia reach the right amount of damage to 1k on an opponent's powerful stage 2 or V-Star that it otherwise wouldn't be able to. The extra damage from Dusknoir is almost too perfect for this deck, and with a wide array of powerful attacks and the possibility to use Pokestop each turn thanks to Night Stretcher's versatility, this deck is very scary to play against and can take down anything in its path. Its biggest downfall is the 1 turn it takes to start accomplishing all this due to having to evolve, but once it does, it can go toe to toe against every deck in the format. Next up we have Dragapult, a very powerful deck thanks to Phantom Dive's damage spread as well as Dusclops and Dusknoir's Curse Blast ability synergizing perfectly to threaten extra damage anywhere on the field. Despite the deck falling a bit out of favor towards the end of the Stellar Crown metagame, it accomplished too many good results to be ignored. Sparkling Crystal and Crispin really brought the deck to a whole new power level, and the new Terra Orb makes it even easier to establish a Dragapult as early as possible to start attacking. I expect a lot of great things from Dragapult, but perhaps it's time to start considering some specific Raging Bolt decks such as Farigiraf or perhaps Mimikyu as a way to try to slow down and take control of those games. It's worth mentioning that a new way to play it started gaining momentum by utilizing 4 Iron Thorns as a way to slow down opponents while setting up, but that version of the deck hasn't quite had any good enough results so far at major tournaments to really make a case to be considered over the regular one. And rounding out the A tier we have Charizard, which unlike a lot of these decks, didn't really get that big glamorous finish during the Stellar Crown metagame. With the pressure from Charizard combined with Dusknoir and Radiant Charizard, the deck has all the necessary tools to compete and be successful, it just wasn't able to get past the Dragapults and Regidragos at the very top. But Charizard can adapt since it has one of the best attacking Pokemon in the game in Radiant Charizard and Charizard EX with its humongous HP, so I think this deck will still have something to say in the upcoming Surging Sparks metagame. Terra Orb and Gravity Mountain are the only viable upgrades for the deck, but I doubt this archetype will change much and it's just a very powerful, well-rounded deck. And finally the S tier of the future Surging Sparks metagame. These 4 decks proved to be the most dominating in the Stellar Crown run of tournaments, getting the best results all over the world and proving their dominance by the numbers as many trainers around the world chose these decks to lead them to the top. Lugia V-Star started off as the hottest deck, getting many placements at the top, and even though it fizzled out towards the end of the Stellar Crown metagame, I still consider it a top contender and incredibly powerful deck. The pairing with Cinccino is perfect, and Legacy Energy opening up the option of Iron Hands EX for the deck brought it to a whole new level, and it showed in its results. You really can't go wrong when you have the best energy accelerating Pokemon we have ever seen in the history of the game. As long as it sets up, it's one of the best decks, no question about it. Next we have Terrapagos, a deck that impressed since the very beginning of the Stellar Crown metagame, and it is now clear that Terrapagos is a top tier contender when combined with Dusknoir. It can target multiple Pokemon at once thanks to it, as well as being extremely bulky when Bouffalin's Curly Wall is active. It has a super consistent fan Rotom plus Noctowl engine, and it's consistently proved itself over and over throughout the course of the metagame, and I fully expect this deck to continue to dominate and be played at the very top of Surging Sparks. And next we have Regidrago. It started off a bit slow after Worlds, but it completely dominated the European events, as well as culminating with a win at LAC with a surprise inclusion of Haxorus. It is one of the most versatile and consistent decks in the format, able to pivot between powerful spread attacks from Dragapult and Kyurem into high damage output with Haxorus and Giratina. It didn't get its win at Worlds, but it finally got its coveted major international win at LAC, and right on time before it rotates next year. And finally, we have Raging Bolt. I think nobody would argue against this being one of the best and most powerful decks right now, and the numbers continue to reflect its strength as the #1 deck in every tournament so far. The deck is simple and straightforward. Get your attacker out, use your key supporter to fully power up, and start doing essentially unlimited damage. The 70 damage multiplier is perfect, and Tealmask Ogerpon is the ideal partner to complement the damage, and with the high bravery charm count in the deck, you have a super resilient Pokemon that threatens to take down every playable card in a single attack. And so, this covers how I think the metagame will initially look like once Surging Sparks is legal at its first major tournament in Sacramento and beyond. And as always, I will continue to reevaluate and adjust my expectations and opinions as we have more results to see if I might have overestimated or underestimated some of these decks. I hope this video has been useful for you, and if you're heading to any of the next tournaments, I wish you the best of luck. I'd love to hear what you think will do well at the upcoming regionals, and if there will be any surprises in the Surging Sparks metagame. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
If you want to support the channel, you can use code tablemon to get 5% off at Potent Store for your online codes, 10% off for your sealed product at Flipside Gaming, and 10% off on your aluminum accessories at TC Evolutions. Or if you're looking to buy singles or sleeves, you can fill up your cart and close the tab, then click on the affiliate link in the description and check out. That way you can support the channel over at TCG Player, Card Market, and Dragon Shield. ¿Eres de México y necesitas cartas de Pokémon? Busca Hyperbeam Cards en Facebook e Instagram. Y si estás en Tijuana, búscalos en el local C27 en el Centro Comercial Otay.